Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Facing February 2024, Everything You Need to Know About Atlassian Server End of Life. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, at the bottom of your audience console, you'll find a number of widgets for questions, slides, and additional resources. When you have a question for the presenter during the webinar, click on the Q&A widget and submit your question. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to yours, we will reach out to you via email. Second, a copy of today's slide deck will be available in the resources folder at the bottom of your screen. Third and finally, if you need any tech support during the webinar, please use the help option. With that, I'll introduce our presenters for today's webinar. Andy Brill, Director of Channel, Partner, and Business Development here at Perforce, Cliffy's parent company. Greg Colber, Director of Business Development, and Russ Schlane, Director of Atlassian Practices, both joining us from Herzum. Andy, Greg, and Russ, thank you for joining us on today's webinar. With that, I'll let Greg get into it.
Great, Talia. Thank you very much, Andy, as well, for having us today. Really appreciate the opportunity and really excited about the topic today. As we know, it's really top of mind for a lot of Atlassian customers today. So Herzum, we are an international IT consulting group. We are headquartered out of Chicago. We have customers in 18 different countries, offices in 6. So as I mentioned, we're headquartered in Chicago, but we have offices in Italy, Switzerland, UK, Colombia, and actually 2 offices in Ecuador. We work with companies ranging from startups all the way to enterprise level. We have over 20 years of experience. The company was founded back in 2020. Started primarily as an agile and DevOps practice. We've been partners with Atlassian since 2005 and a platinum partner since 2008. And we are a specialized Atlassian cloud partner. If you're looking to get in touch with us, you can check out our website, herzum.com. You can reach out to us at info@herzum.com. I know that Andy will put up our email addresses towards the end. Follow us on LinkedIn. We also have a Twitter page and then a YouTube channel where you can check out some of our other webinars that we've done in the past. Andy, I'll kick it back to you then. Thanks.
All right, perfect. So the whole point of this webinar, right, is to talk about the farewell to server. So as everyone can see here, it's been an awesome run, but it is time to say goodbye. For those of you who don't know, Atlassian Server has actually been around dating back all the way into 2002, but February 15th, 2024 is the official end date of Server. The official last day that you can get server maintenance, and that's what we'll be talking about today, because with Server going away, you will have a couple of options, data center or cloud. And with that, we're going to get into the questions we will discuss. The first one is actually right on the screen here. Server end of life is on February 15, 2024, as we've already discussed. So why not wait till the day before to start the migration? Why do it now? Why not be like me back in college and do everything the night before the test or night before the project is due? Let me hand it over to Russ to explain maybe why this isn't a great idea, or Russ, maybe why this is a great idea. I'll let you take the floor now.
As you can imagine, my answer would be it's not a great idea. I think first and foremost, people think about security, right? The moment the February 15th hits, there's no updates from Atlassian on the server product, and any CVEs that come out, and as we've seen as of late, there's quite a few coming out every so often. There's no updates, there's no security patches, you get nothing. And so really the only way to mitigate any of that is to move on either to the cloud and the data center. Now, yes, you can wait, yes, you can move over to data center. The problem is that with all of those, through your Atlassian licensing with server, you get Atlassian support. On the server side, if there's any issues with it, anything that needs to be changed or what have you, you still can rely on Atlassian up until the February 15th. Moment that day hits, all of that goes away, and then essentially on your own, you have to pick, you have to pay for the new licenses, and then kind of go from there with the either cloud or the data center. Um, and then the other thing is, you know, a lot of people are going to be doing migrations, right? I mean, the light will turn on for people, and they'll be like, okay, we need to do it. The closer you wait to February 15th, you know, the longer the queue is going to be to get you guys migrated. You know, we're already seeing a little bit of a backlog in terms of the people trying to get migrated, and you know, we're trying to allocate our teams to do migration for the customers. Depending on the size of the instance, it may take, you know, upwards of, you know, 3, 4, maybe, you know, for big ones, up to 6 months to migrate. And so you do not want to be, you know, caught and, you know, trying to do that last minute, because it will not be quick.
Yeah, Russ, you just hit on the point that I was thinking about, and it's the how long does it take, right? And it's not a simple flip of the switch. It's not I buy cloud licenses, I push a button, everything migrates over to cloud from my server. It's we have to go in, we have to clean up. What apps do I have in my instance? Some of those apps don't even exist in cloud today. Some of the issues are there's maybe not a migration path for those apps. You know, not everyone is set up like Glyphia is, where you know there is a migration path. So there's some challenges from the standpoint of how quickly can we determine what is our new instance going to look like. Let's evaluate, do we even need all the apps that we currently have? There's a number of now out of the box benefits of cloud, where it used to be an app that took care of that, and now I don't need that app anymore. So there could be a potential cost savings from that side of starting to eliminate applications. But I think the other point we kind of joke about is the CVEs, right? Like February 16th, we know Atlassian is going to issue a CVE with, you know, hey, there's a security risk, right? And you need to do something to upgrade. Well, there's no patch anymore at that point. So what are you going to do? So I think those are, you know, some of the reasons that we see. Andy, I don't know what else you see on your side.
I've been using a couple of car analogies for this to explain to people. So sometimes when you buy a new car, the warranty runs out, and then you keep driving the car and everything's fine. So you're like, well, this is great, you know, no problem here. But think of it like this, where there's no more warranty and there's no more parts, and you are left on your own for literally everything for the car. You're going to have to change the alternator on your own. The heads blow. Again, there's no mechanic. Like, this is kind of how I've been explaining it in my mind and to various people, is that no warranty, no parts, no mechanics, no nothing after February 15, 2024, which I know kind of sounds like a scare tactic, but there is a lot of truth to that. And I did want to mention, Talia, you might have to fact check this point. I think I looked it up, February 15, 2024. It's in the middle of the week. So for those of you who are like me that are thinking like, oh, maybe I'll just move the data center and just do it on the weekend, go to single node. It's during the week. So I think you're going to be pretty busy. It's not going to be like February 15th on a Saturday or Sunday. I'm pretty sure it's on a Wednesday or Thursday. So you're going to want to do this well before that date.
I do want to bring in another point, and this is not something that a lot of people know. This is when they say February 15th, 2024, that's February 15th in Australia. That means that it is February 14th, 2024, everywhere else in the world. And so that's how they, you know, issue their licensing. The start and end date is by Australian time. And then you essentially have until the 14th. So, you know, things get turned off or disappear. It's because of that.
I've run into customers who've figured that out the hard way, Russ, that the date is actually what you just said, in Australia time and not in, let's say, US time. So to your point, yeah, that's even one less day. That if you're thinking of doing this to the very, very end, you got to minus one day off the 15th, which kind of compounds the problem if you are actually waiting to the end. So I think we're in agreement that it's a bad idea. As funny as it sounds to just be like, oh, I'll just wait until the very end. There's real ramifications that you might run into. So with that, let me go to question 2 of Atlassian's become very cloud centric in terms of they talk about moving to cloud pretty much every time you'll talk to anyone from Atlassian, but there is data center. Why not move to just data center from server? Or why not move to data center first as a stopgap? Give yourself more time to move to cloud. Russ, what are your thoughts on people who ask that question?
Well, there are some customers that don't have a choice. There are certain things that cloud may not support. FedRAMP, so on and so forth. But it's very, it's a handful. Other folks that can go to cloud and thinking about data center, there's still migration that needs to happen. You got to consider all the hardware. You need to consider all the steps and things you need to do to get moved over from server to data center. And so you're going to be paying for that migration, which is okay. But my question to you is, how do you know how long the data center has? We've talked many times, and there was never a conversation about server going away, and all of a sudden we're less than 6 months away from that, right? And so, I don't want to speculate, but my guess would be once all the certifications and the and all of the like ISO and FedRAMP and all of those are obtained by Atlassian and available in the cloud, my guess is we're going to see a clock ticking for data center to disappear as well.
Yeah, and so I, kind of on top of that, you talked about there's a cost to move to data center, right? It's not just as simple. In some situations, you can plug in a new data center license and be up and running. But in other situations, there's actually a migration that has to occur, and there's a process to that, and there's a cost to that. And now what you're doing is you're paying for 2 migrations essentially. So I'm potentially paying, and if I'm doing the migration myself, there's downtime, right? There's the internal cost of having people to do that. And then my goal is to in a year to make the move to cloud. And now I have another migration that, we just spent, 6 months maybe internally prepping for the move to data center. And now we spend another 6 months in prepping to go to cloud. So there is some lost time and some lost cost by taking that interim step of data center. I think the other side of it is you lose a lot of the functionality. So yes, Atlassian says data centers here to stay, but the reality is all the money for research and development is going into cloud. A lot of their new tools like analytics, data lakes, only available if you're in cloud, and in some situations only available if you're enterprise level in cloud. So I think as a large enterprise organization, you lose a lot of the top features and benefits and functionality of what cloud has to offer by taking that step to data center. So
Yeah, and on the Gliffy side, speaking as someone who has differences in their app for Gliffy for cloud and Gliffy for data center, there's obviously much more investment internally here for our cloud app. I think I speak with a lot of the vendors, marketplace vendors who will say the same thing, right? And there's also, for us, one of our big tools that we came out with earlier this year called collaboration and Gliffy for cloud. We can't do that in Gliffy for data center for a variety of reasons, but you will actually see some of the apps have completely different tools, or more tools, I should say, in cloud that they do in data center. Not to say that we're not enhancing our data center. We're actually coming out with an update later this month with some new features, but those new features have already been in cloud for months and months and months, right? So I think a lot of vendors, a lot of app providers such as Gliffy, it's, cloud gets all the goodies first, maybe data center gets them later, but to begin, I mean, cloud has had all of these tools that our data center is going to come out with for months. So that is also something to consider.
yeah, no, I think real quick before you move on to the questions, it's your return on your investment, right? Is, hey, if I can create a lot more automations in cloud than I do in data center, even if I save my developers 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, but if I have 500 developers, all that time per day starts to add up from a cost savings aspect, and just from an efficiency and functionality standpoint. So really it's something to consider as you start to look at, what the options are.
Yeah, and that actually kind of segues into the next question of, look, there's a real cost to go from just renewing server over and over again for years and years and years to then not only purchasing the increase in licensing costs for cloud, but then hiring a partner such as Herzum for doing some of the consulting work. So I think what a lot of people see is look, like I've had these server licenses run for years. We've done regular renewals with them for years. And now Atlassian's asking me to buy cloud licenses that are more expensive, and we can't do the migration ourselves. So we need to hire a partner. there's a cost with that. I mean, how does that make financial sense is kind of a big question that I hear a lot. And Russ, I know that's a tough one. So you're really going to have to sell it now. How does that
It
make
is.
sense for a customer?
Oh, look, I mean, this is a reality, right? I mean, servers going away, and you know, you have likely you have options. When we talk to customers about moving on to the cloud or data center, the first thing is, let's table for a second the migration itself. This is a chance to take a step back, take a look at your instance, see what's needed, what's not. Let's clean it up, right? Even talking to Atlassian, they encourage the cleanup, right? So let's see if we can make the scope of the migration smaller, so that we don't have to bring all that junk that you've been accumulating for years, and don't look at it, don't use it. You don't need it. I mean, on the other hand, the server license is perpetual, right? It's not going to be supported. Throw it on a VM, shut it down, let it be there. Have the comfort of saying that, hey, it's there, we can have it. But let's clean it up. Let's make the migration smaller. Let's make the migration smoother, and then that will play in favorably in trying to sell it to the C-suite and the ones that fund these types of projects. On the other hand, the experience going from server to cloud, that when people are using the actual tool in the cloud, we hear a lot more favorable reviews, right? People like cloud a lot more. And then, I mean, essentially, the server is going to win. Like I said in the beginning, it's inevitable. It's there. We can move on to go to the cloud. You can look at the alternatives, but people are not used to those. You're going to still get the consistency. You'll still have the same features, better now, because you can have all this added functionality, like Greg mentioned. In the end, it may or may not cost you more because of the added functionality that cloud has. You may, omit some of the plugins, some expensive ones that are out there that do automations, that do all kinds of different things that cloud does out of the box and does pretty well. So it's definitely a discussion. It's definitely something that you should look at, and in the grand scheme of things. And then we'll try as much as possible to kind of alleviate that pain point.
Yeah, and I think so there's a lot of added value in working with a partner like Herzum, and one is kind of process, right? So as companies are considering making the move from server to cloud, as Russ said, it's an opportunity to do cleanup, but it's also an opportunity to review like best practices, right? So here's our time where we can say, look, here's with the way our workflows have worked. Is this really the way we want to work, right? We've inherited these, over the last 10 years. I'm the third person in this role. This is not the way that I would do it. I think there's a better way to do it. So here's a great opportunity for us to clean up that process piece, and lean on someone like Herzum to guide you along that path. And here's what other customers that we work with are doing that are in the same vertical as you. Some of our large customers and the experiences that they've had. Let us help you learn from that. Also, as far as using a partner like Herzum is, we've been doing these migrations for almost 2 years now, so we've made the mistakes already, right? We've learned from those, and so now we bring that expertise and that talent to help you make it more of a smooth transition. I think the quickest migration we've done was 2 months, and that was for about a 2,000 user group. I mean, it was pretty intensive, but we were able to get that migration completed. Atlassian does provide, support, but their support is not keys on the handboard. It's like, hey, try this, or did you try that, or let us reset this for you. So, don't go into this expecting that Atlassian is doing this migration for you and that there's no cost for it. There's a cost, and if you try to do it internally, it's whatever time and employees you throw at it, or you look to Herzum, and we work in two different ways. So we've done where we do the full migration, like A to Z, let us do it for you, or we can be more of a support role where, hey, you get stuck, you're like, hey, we need some help here. How can you assist, and let us help you from that standpoint. So it really is imperative to work with a partner like Herzum, to really avoid a lot of those pitfalls and to really minimize the effort and time that goes into these migrations. So
I can talk through some examples that I've seen come through on the Gliffy tech support where people are doing the migrating on their own from server to cloud, and then they're asking us some pretty crazy questions, and we're like, "What partner are you working with?" And well, we're not working with a partner. And it's, have you ever done this before? And I'm like, that's kind of where the conversation ends, because it's either they're just too embarrassed or they just kind of go away. They're like, "Oh crap, I did something wrong." Working with a partner is someone. I mean, obviously you guys are partners, so people are going to think this is a sales pitch, but it is true. I mean, you're not going to do this on your own for a 2,000 user environment if you actually kind of don't know what you're doing. At minimum, work with a partner to just ask questions on your own if you think you can do this, right? So I think, yeah, I can vouch for the people that we're seeing that are, well, I'm doing the migration and this isn't working, and it's like, well, that's because you're doing it wrong. Like, that's because you're trying to do it by yourself, bespoke, and you're trying to cut costs, and I get that, but working with a partner, that's where it actually does make financial sense in the end, because you're going to spend actually less time and less money if you start with a partner versus trying to do it on your own. Is kind of my 2 cents to add on that.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it's one thing to say that, look, we've done it before. We have, but all of our resources are certified and accredited, and so this is coming from Atlassian, that we have done our due diligence. We know the product, we know the processes, and so that also kind of makes customers more comfortable saying that we do have people that know what they're doing and have done it before, right? Not just the words. It's there, supported by Atlassian.
Getting back to the questions here, question 4 kind of dovetails back to question 1, but why not just renew server until the end and then migrate sometime later that year, right? Server is still going to work after February 15th, correct? Russ, this is questions for people who don't like deadlines. These are people who are stubborn, where you give them a deadline and they're like, I'm going to see how far this deadline really is. So you want to talk some sense into people who think like this?
So we've seen this many times, and people just try to avoid it. They don't want to talk about it. They not until they need to think about it. They'll think about it. We had a customer that the C-suite got involved because they were actually one of the folks in the C-suite were the ones that brought Atlassian in and were a huge advocate. Big instance, and started a conversation on what we're doing for migration. And the folks that were taking care of the instance said, well, we're waiting until it ends and then we'll figure it out. And so there was a lot of talking to, and at some point a person's job was on the line. Like, this is not a responsible thing to do. You need to kind of think forward with what's going on with the tool. Mission critical tool cannot just not be supported. And so there was a lot of a lengthy and not pleasant conversations. So all that aside, like I mentioned before, security, big deal. A lot of customers, the bigger the customer, the bigger the concern is. We've seen folks not update and get hacked, and all kinds of different things were happening to the servers because they did not have the latest patch. The second thing is, I also mentioned this before, you're going to realize you need to do a migration. You're not going to be able to do it on your own. You can try, but you may or may not. And then the queue of the customer that want to do a migration is going to be absolutely long, and it'll take a while to get you going. So the earlier you start, the better. I think those are probably the big two arguments to not to renew and then start the migration.
yeah, I know you were talking about the customer, made me think of a different opportunity that we were talking to a prospective customer, and they were just focused really on Jira and doing the migration on Jira. And we have this like 45-minute conversation, and at the end Russ was like, well, what are you gonna do about Confluence? We're like, Confluence is going away too. And so I think it's important to understand, look, it's Atlassian tools, it's Confluence, it's Bitbucket, it's server tools. I think Fisheye and Crucible are sticking around still. But at the end of the day, it's pretty much any Atlassian server tool that you need to worry about, and so that tends to complicate it, right? So you can do the migrations at the same time. You can work on Confluence and Jira and Bitbucket all at the same time, and then typically we migrate those over different weekends. But again, planning that out and just understanding that process, is really important, especially as you talked about. Hey, I'm just going to I'll wait till after February 15th, and I'm going to see what happens. And at that point, it's too late because we've talked a little bit about it earlier. Once there's a critical issue, there's no patch for it. So what are you going to do? How do you scramble and now your job is at risk or the company's at risk? So it's really not the appropriate thing to do is wait to see what happens, or hope that. The other thing we hear is that, well, I'm going to wait and maybe Atlassian is going to extend the deadline, right? Atlassian's been very clear. They are not extending the deadline for end of life. End of life is set in stone at this point, and that's not going to change. So as we always say, hope is not a plan, right? So let's make sure you plan this out, work with a partner, identify the process. What does that timeline look like, and how can we help?
Boy, Greg, if Atlassian extended the server deadline, I would lose my mind, among other things. I think a lot of people would. So I think, again, what you brought up is, I think, kind of a hope and a prayer that a lot of people have of, like Atlassian, maybe they'll blink. Maybe there'll be something at the end to say, well, we're going to move the date just a little bit for just the bigger customer. As of right now, that has not happened, right? And if that doesn't happen, which we all think they're probably sticking to this date. This date, just so everyone has been aware, this was announced in 2020. This has been a 4-year runway in the making of saying servers going away. This date has not moved in over 3 years, right? Not saying that it's not impossible, but for over 3 years, this date has been set in stone. As I put up on the slide a couple of slides ago, I mean, this has been here for a while. Now, whether or not there's a last minute change or something, I have no idea, but we're all assuming this is the deadline and that this date's not going to move. And again, you're going to be on your own if this all happens the way that Atlassian's been telling us the way it's going to happen. So I think that was a good point to bring up, Greg, about, is this date really set in stone? It's like,
Yeah.
Some things kind of are. So we will see. And the date's getting closer and it hasn't moved. So that should scare you in and of itself if that's what the big hope is. I think that's a pretty big risk. So the final question is, like a lot of people, I've been on Atlassian Server for many years, but migrating such a hassle. Why not just move? You know what? Why not go to Microsoft, ServiceNow, Monday.com, any of the other competitors? I mean, why migrate to Atlassian Cloud or Data Center when, look, there are other options, there are other competitors. Why not try them out? Rush, you got to save Atlassian here.
Well, so if you are a customer that has 10, 15, 20 people, it's a hard argument, right? Maybe try, why not? It's pretty easy for you to move over. You don't even need to bring your stuff with you. You can, small company, you can start out. The bigger the company, now you start running into things. And we've seen this with pretty much every competitor that's out there. Atlassian is cheaper. Out of the box, you go to Atlassian Cloud, it's cheaper per user. Number one. Number two, when you do the migration, you still get the consistency, right? You get the familiar look and feel, you get the workflows, you get all of that persistency of the process. All of that is pretty much unchanged. Yeah, there are subtle changes. There are certain things that look a little bit differently, but intuitively, if you're going to walk into Atlassian Cloud, into Jira, Confluence, you're going to know what to do. This is not going to be a new thing. Yeah, you might need to sit through a couple-hour class, but that's about it. Moving over to Microsoft, the ServiceNow, Monday.com, completely different tools, completely different architecture, completely different flow of the process. It's going to be hard, especially the bigger the company, trying to move over that user base of 2, 5, 10,000 users it's going to be a pain. We have a customer that actually moved over to the cloud. They have over 25,000 users, and it's been an uphill battle for them to kind of, get folks onboarded. But it helped because they went from the on-prem to the cloud, and so all of the bits and pieces were still familiar, and so that definitely helped to get people migrated and onboarded. But if you're gonna have to do that with a brand new tool, that's just a different type of headache that you are trying to embark on.
Yeah, and that Russ, I think you touched on it too. There's still migration cost, right? So if I'm a 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, however many users I am, if I want my data, I got to migrate my data. So there's still migration involved, and migrating from Atlassian to a non-Atlassian tool is going to be much more challenging than going from server to cloud. So the migration itself, is a much simpler migration as opposed to moving to a new tool. I think the other piece you touched on, Russ, is really the training aspect. I'm now using the new user interface. Maybe I'm not familiar with ServiceNow or Monday.com. I've never seen it before. I got to figure it out. Or we had a process that we did within inside of Atlassian, and now maybe that process doesn't really function the same inside of those new platforms. I mean, we've seen where people are still using spreadsheets to manage projects, right? And how hard is it to get them off of an Excel spreadsheet to move to something? So I think the same thing applies is when you become so comfortable with a tool like Atlassian, to try to make that change to another platform is really, really challenging. And I think the overall cost long term, because of the downtime and the transition and the migration, the cost is actually more substantial than if I migrate from Atlassian to Atlassian.
Yeah.
Russ, I kind of appreciate you kind of calling everyone's bluff on this one. Like, hey, if you want to move to Microsoft Service anyway, like, go ahead and try it. Because look, if you're saying that these companies don't have any issues or any problems, or if they're not all going to go cloud only, be my guest. The other point that I've mentioned to people is, look, if you've been using Atlassian, Confluence, or Jira for years and years and years, you've got so much data, proprietary info, things you've worked really hard for that you do not want to screw around with in terms of losing it in a migration somewhere else. And also I think it was Greg, you mentioned that, like, it's really, or I think this was Russ, if you've been using Confluence for years, going from server to cloud, it's going to look the same, right? We went internally here from server to cloud, and it wasn't that big of a deal in terms of, we didn't have training. I just kept using Confluence like I normally had, right? So the pickup time for all of your employees is just going to be pretty minimal in terms of it's Confluence at the end of the day, or it's Jira, right? Or if you're moving from server to data center for Bitbucket, it's still Bitbucket at the end of the day, right? I mean, there's going to be more tools and more enhancements because you're in cloud or data center, but it's the look and feel of it is pretty similar. And I think if you don't want to have another round of training okay, we're going to train you on Monday.com. That's where, Greg, you talk about, like, there's still people who use like Excel spreadsheets for everything. And I'm guilty of that here, honestly. If I showed you what I use in Excel, my management would go insane, right? Because I'm like, look, I've been using this for years and years and years, for decades now. And like, I'm comfortable with it. It's easy to use. I have it. I'm not going to change. So I do think there's a lot of that in terms of old habits die hard. And again, if you've been using Confluence or Jira for years, going to the cloud, you're not going to need to train people. They're just going to say, oh, we're in cloud now for Confluence. Let me get back to what I was doing yesterday, right? That's the training is 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So with that, after those questions, I wanted to go through a helpful checklist for everyone listening. Again, we've reiterated on this date, February 15th. That's the last day of support for server. So be sure to check your maintenance dates. Be sure to actually see, are you out of maintenance? Have you renewed until that last date? Discuss internally in terms of, what's the move? Is it data center for you? Is it cloud? That's going to be a big decision to make. You can always go from data center to cloud, but as we discussed earlier, you're not going to want to do the same work twice. It would be much easier on you if you kind of picked the lane and kind of went with it. Email Herzum for quote. What we haven't talked about is Herzum can do fixed price, quoting. Just reach out to them for a free quote. talk to them for a little bit, talk to Greg, talk to Russ, talk to the rest of the team. Because again, the big thing is do not wait until the very end. Do not wait, actually, as what Russ said, do not wait until February 14th, because that's the official date. So don't wait until that date to email Herzen. But if you do, email them and say, I'm sorry, I know this is last minute, but I've got a big environment. Walk me through the steps here on what I need to do to get moved over to data center or cloud, because I don't want to get fired. It's essentially what's going to happen.
And
So with
Andy,
that, I'll go
sorry,
ahead.
Andy, real quick, just to jump in. So yeah, from a, happy to quote you on the actual migration cost, but also from a licensing standpoint. So as a platinum partner, we, can sell licenses. We provide discounts on licensing, Atlassian licenses, as well as, the third-party applications, especially, Fliffy. So, we can assist you with licensing and services, just as a reminder.
Yeah, and the one thing is, you come talk to us. I lost count of how many security departments I've talked to at companies, right? I mean, it's just, we have the answers that you might need to have time spent trying to figure out and research. We'll be able to come in and have those answers for you ready to go. So, to minimize that, from the idea to the actual, let's talk about actually migrating, we can help you breeze through that decision making, just by providing the right answers to kind of support you and guide you through that. So,
and I think to make it clear that there's not a cost for that initial consultation evaluation. So Russ and I are happy to jump on a call with anybody, talk about their situation, get a better understanding of it, and then come back to them with what kind of their options are before they decide if they want to move forward with Herzen or not. So it's not like, hey, spend $5,000 to figure out what you need to do. It's, let's have a conversation. Let's figure out what you are, where you are, and how can we help you.
yeah, and there has been emphasis where we sit down, we're adamant about going to cloud. We have a conversation, and then we actually suggest going to data center, just because there's certain things that on their checklist that we cannot check off on the cloud. And so it's definitely a conversation. It's definitely the experience that we can bring to the table to kind of help you make the decision.
All good points that we can end on in terms of, I want to hand it back over to Talia. We've got our contact info up on the screen, and I think, Talia, we're gonna close this with some Q&A questions, but I'll send it back to you right now.
Yeah, thank you everyone that's attended today's webinar. We do have a few minutes left for questions, so we'll move into Q&A time like Andy mentioned. And then you can find the presenter's contact information here, and you can reach out to them personally if you have any questions for them. But with that, our first question from the audience asks, are there any plans to get rid of data center for Atlassian in the near future?
We've kind of touched on that. That's kind of a spicy one. My opinion is I'm more aligned with Russ in terms of, I think long term, again, this is speculative. This is not, I'm not speaking on behalf of Gliffy or anybody, just me. I think one day data center will go away, is my honest opinion. I don't know when, but I think it's going to have to be when FedRAMP is certified. Every certification, every box will have to be checked. And then I think it will have a sunsetting. I think it will be eliminated. But in terms of right now, for the rest of the decade, my honest opinion is no. But I do think, one day, I do think Atlassian is going to be a cloud-only company. And again, that's just my opinion. That's, what I think. Russ and Greg, if you want to go out on a limb like me, go ahead. But I think eventually, to answer that question directly, because I get that a lot, I think one day it will go away, but I don't think it's going to be overnight. But I could be wrong. But yeah, I'll let Russ and Greg kind of step into that one.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, February 16th, it's not going to be like, okay, data center's over. 4 years off you go. I think we can take a cue from Atlassian of how long it takes to sunset a product, and so I think it is probably going to be a couple of years before they, fully certified and everything. And then, tag on another 4 or 5 years on top of that to sunset a product. And then, now we're talking, 7, 8 years until, possible data center disappearance. And so, but that will, the experiences that we have now will teach us that we need to start, thinking about migration early on. And hopefully, if you do embark into data center, you can start thinking about moving over to the cloud earlier and not wait until the last minute.
Yeah, and officially Atlassian says it's not going away, just so we're clear. But
Yeah.
yeah, being knowing what we've seen and kind of what we've gone through, I think we all kind of in agreement as to what the reality might look like in 5-6 years. So
Okay. Our next question asks, if I pay for a migration and I was able to complete half the migration myself, would HRSM credit me back a refund for half the cost?
This is a good one though. This is set up beautifully for Russ and Greg. So Russ, I'll let you run into that one.
I am a little bit perplexed. I have to answer that question. If we do the migration and then you do half of it, I mean, we'll identify the way that we work together. And so if we can help you as a kind of the on the side and just kind of be able to guide you through the migration, sure. If we start the migration and do it soup to nuts, I mean that's we did the migration, right? So it's interestingly put question. I'm not, maybe Greg has a better answer to that.
I think it's important to understand. So we do have some migration packages on our website that are fixed costs, and there's certain requirements that you need to meet on that. Now, if it applied to one of those, it would be a little bit of a different conversation. But normally the way that we work is time and materials. And so it's all based on what the time that we spend on a migration. So we might estimate the migration to be a certain cost. And let's say we get through half of that cost and the migration is complete. Well, and if you did most of the work, then we're not going to bill you for the other half. So, if it ends up being that you do the majority of the work and we're there as a support role, we're happy to do that. There'd really be no migration, nothing to refund because we haven't collected that fee all front.
Okay, it looks like we have time for one more question. This question asks, why is cloud so much more expensive for Atlassian than server?
Well, I think for me personally, and speaking on Gliffy, I mean, obviously when you look up Gliffy for cloud, data center, server, I mean, yeah, our cloud license is more expensive. There's more tools, there's been more investment put into it. I think for years and years and years, truthfully, server was probably cheaper than it should have been for Atlassian. And speaking for some of the apps, I mean, that was kind of the way into the market, right? Land and expand. Years ago, I mean, Atlassian used to give you 10 users for server for $10 a year. And then 25, 50 users was relatively cheap. I mean, that was the land and expand strategy. So I think, yes, I think the problem is we kind of touched on this earlier, where when people look at it like, man, I was paying nothing for these server renewals for years, and now cloud is so much more expensive, and now I got to add migration costs to this. I think it is a little bit of a sticker shock for some people. My counter to that is, yeah, that was in the past and that was years ago, and like, unfortunately, not to sound mean, but like those days are over. Like you ain't getting these deals like that anymore. Atlassian does have cloud for 10 users and below free, right? And Gliffy fits into that. Our app for cloud, if you're up to 10 users, is free, whether you're monthly or annually. But the moment you hit 11 users, that's when you're on the clock. That's when we expect you to start paying us. And then it's obviously more than what server was, right? Because again, you have all these new features and enhancements to the app. So Russ, I'll let you kind of get into that. For people who just look at it from a cost analysis, they're like, man, cloud's more expensive than server. I mean, that there's no getting away from that, right?
Well, it is and it isn't, right? We're not, when we're talking cloud, we're not figuring in the cost of hardware. We're not figuring in the cost of full-time people that need to support it. And I'm not just talking Jira admins, right? There's folks on the database side. There's folks on the engineering side that take care of the servers. They do updates and everything else. The Jira admin as well. I mean, as much as I hate to say it, right? Because this one, kind of strikes close to home. You've got a Jira admin that is not going to be as busy anymore because he doesn't have to take care of the upgrades, restarts. I mean, you name it, all kinds of different things that they have to do to kind of maintain the Jira instance. The other thing is how much are your servers? How much does it cost to upgrade those? Electricity, connection, everything in between. And it's just there's a lot of more costs that people don't think about up front, but then you start talking about it, they go like, oh, okay. I mean, it might be still slightly more expensive, but it's not as big of a gap as some people might think.
Yeah, and I think a few of the other things are features and benefits, right? So one is that, and I guess the other thing, Russ, you talked about, like it's being hosted by Atlassian, right, in AWS. So there's a cost for that storage space in cloud, and then there's advanced roadmaps is now included, automation. If you're on JSM, you get the asset management piece is now included in that. So there's a lot of other tools that used to be separate tools that you had to pay for that are now included in it. Yes, it costs a little bit more, but you're getting a lot more for that value. I think the one thing that we did not touch on that I just want to comment on real quickly is that the whole data center versus cloud is data center has a minimum of 500 users. So I know our focus is really trying to assist the larger organization. We talked about the difference of why cloud versus data center. Well, if I only have 200 users, do I want to pay for 500 data center licenses? And so the reality is the cost is substantially more for data center if I only have 200 or 300 users. So again, something to consider as you're looking at, data center versus cloud, and what the real cost of that becomes is, do I want to overpay? And most of us don't. So I think that's where the value added. Yes, server was very inexpensive. And Andy, to your point, I think it was extremely, undervalued. There's a great value for the amount of money that people were paying. And so I think Atlassian is just, even though they're still less expensive than Microsoft and ServiceNow, yes, it's more expensive, but you get a lot more for your money these days.
Great. It looks like there are a few questions we'll take as follow-ups, but we're going to wrap up this webinar for now. If we didn't get to your question, we will reach out to you via email. Again, thank you to our audience for your attendance, and thank you, Andy, Greg, and Russ for your participation in today's webinar.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.